Charting Toward Intimacy covers mature topics. Listener discretion is advised. If you've been listening to this podcast for any amount of time, you've probably heard us talking about you need to love your spouse outside of the bedroom. So in today's podcast episode, we are going to be giving you some really practical advice about a way that you can love your spouse outside of the bedroom, and that is pursuing your spouse. So jump in. This is going to be an awesome episode. Welcome to Charting Toward Intimacy, the sex and intimacy podcast for Catholic women. My name is Ellen Holloway. I am a Catholic speaker and coach who specializes in sex and marital intimacy, and I am on a mission to help you actually enjoy and desire good, holy sex with your spouse. In today's episode, I have Kathleen, my amazing semi-regular co-host, joining me, and we are going to talk about pursuing your husband and what an amazing gift that is to your marriage. So I always love to just kind of talk a little theologically first, and then we'll jump into like the real life.
The practical.
So let's talk about pursue. And we're going to be focusing this episode on like you as the wife pursuing your husband. But if you're a husband listening, like just switch it around, or like, but that's just, we're going to take it from that direction. So pursuing is sometimes very hard for us as humans to do. And here's why, is that we love because he first loved us. The human condition is responding to love, not initiating love. And so the process of initiating love and like pursuing is actually a little bit outside of our human, like natural design, comfort level. You could kind of say something along those lines. And it's not to say that pursuing is bad. It's really, really, really good. But I think something that helps is to just recognize that it's actually not something that we are naturally inclined to do. Because of how we are made in the image and likeness of God, and we respond to God's love of us. God created us first, and he loved us in that creation. And so our living our life is a response to that initial act of love. And any love of the Father is a response to his love. And so what we often will default to, if we're not actively thinking about it in our intimate relationship of husband and wife, is we'll default to wanting to be pursued by the other and not actively pursuing the other. And that's because marriage is an image of the relationship that God wants to have with us. We've talked about this a lot on the podcast, is that, the relationship of husband and wife is this image of the relationship that God wants to have with us. We see that all throughout the Old Testament. Mm-hmm. We've got like Israel is the bride, right? The Lord is the spouse, and we've got all this spousal imagery. And so it's like, it makes sense that like our default, especially as women, because we particularly have, we have this feminine posture as humans, like all humans, male or female, have a feminine posture toward God. A feminine posture means a posture of receptivity. That's literally like what I've been saying here, is that like receiving God's love and giving it back. That is the feminine posture. And then as women, we are inclined to that feminine posture just ever so slightly easier because we're female. Like, and that's, again, it's just how we're designed. And sometimes all it takes is just turning the lights on a little bit for some of these aspects for us to recognize that like, okay, yeah, this might be uncomfortable, but that doesn't mean I can't do it. I might not be naturally inclined to this, but doesn't mean I can't do it. So we as humans have that inclination to just want to be pursued. All of us, male and female, we want to be pursued because God pursues us. So that searching for that pursuit is ultimately a searching for relationship with God. And what we, in that intimate relationship of husband and wife, something we need to be really careful of is that we're not, putting the onus of all of the pursuit of love toward us on our spouse, because that's not our spouse's job, right? Yeah. That's God's job.
Yeah.
So put that onus on God because he's already giving it. But then at the same time, we can image that pursuit within our relationships. That's going to help us get to know our spouse better. It's going to help us get to know God better too. And so we can play the role of the pursuer in order to give that gift to our spouse of that pursuit. And either spouse can do that. And so that's what we're going to talk about today, is that role of the pursuer and how we as women, we as wives, can pursue our spouse and how good that is for our relationship, and how in pursuing our husband, we're giving him a taste of heaven. We're giving him a taste of God's love for him. And it's so good to pursue. But just recognize that, it's totally okay if you're not immediately naturally inclined to that, because the human condition isn't. And again, it's all okay. We have that knowledge. I just spent 5 minutes telling you about it. And so now you're done. You've learned everything you need to know. You never need to learn anything more about it.
You're good to go. Yeah, you're good.
But now you can start to flip that in your head of just because I'm not naturally inclined to this doesn't mean I can't do it. Doesn't mean I won't be good at it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think I really like what you said about the feminine posture, because this is something that all people, male or female, may not be naturally inclined to, but I think even less so women, right? Because kind of along with the purity culture stuff, right? I mean, if you're anything like me, came along that message of no, you should be pursued. You are the woman, right? It is a man's job to pursue you, not your job to pursue him. That was a message that was very much drilled into me in high school, in early college. It was no, you should be pursued, to the point that when I was sort of pursuing some guy, right, then I had those people in my life saying, he's not pursuing you. This isn't good. This isn't going to be a good relationship. Now, ultimately they were right, but it didn't necessarily, but it was that message that was not correct in there, that you have no business pursuing. Yeah. Right. And so,
and there is a special role that the man plays in this pursual, because by a function of his biological nature of being male, he does have that imagery in the spousal relationship of the masculine posture. And that's the posture that the Lord has toward us. That's the posture of giving first, right? So the man does have a particular role in pursuit.
Yes.
And, it's there's bits of truth, right, in what they were saying. And that's all of purity cultures. It's okay, there's bits of truth, but you're blowing it out of proportion, right?
Yes, that's exactly it.
And so it's it's not that we have no business pursuing. We do have a business pursuing.
Yeah.
We're in relationship with another human being, and we're trying to give them an idea of how much God loves them through our spousal relationship. So we've got a job to do, and that's pursuing our husband. But but it is true that there is a particular inclination that men, I think, a little bit more naturally have, and just a little bit particular of a role in that pursual. But again, it's not to say that we have no business pursuing. And what we're going to talk about now for the next 20 minutes is how can you pursue your spouse and how good it is for your relationship when you do, because it shows your spouse that you love them.
Yeah. And one thing that I do, so this is all personal experience, okay? I have failed. I have absolutely failed in pursuing my husband because and we've been married 11 years. We're coming up on 12 in the fall, right? And I have just absolutely leaned in to that feminine posture. And I mean, just he knows I love him. Yeah, it's so easy, right? Like, he knows I love him. I raise his children. I stay home and, take care of the house. Like, he knows that I love him, right? Like, these are the things that I do in a day. But it came out, only semi-recently, right? that he was not necessarily feeling loved by me because I wasn't actively pursuing him for 11 years. Right. And it was just like, well, what do you mean? Like, how would you like me to do that? Like, what are ways that if you don't feel loved by these things that I'm already doing, like, what are the ways that you feel loved?
Right. What does that even mean?
What does that even mean?
To pursue you. Yeah.
And I will say that the way this came out was through problems in our sexual relationship.
That is how so many things come out.
Yes. And so it was and all this time we had been working to try and meet halfway and remedy our sexual relationship. And ultimately it came out that you know what? It's not sex that's the problem. It's the fact that I'm not feeling loved in any other way. And I was like, oh, okay. Now we can actually get somewhere. And even with this knowledge, it's still been really hard to remedy because there hasn't been a habit created. It's it's requiring me to develop a new habit. And I'm also just really bad at habits. So, it's actually this I just read a quote this morning, just in my morning prayer time. There was a quote from Mother Teresa about how love to be love has to really hurt a little bit. There has to be love isn't something that is just going to happen naturally. It's going to require sacrifice. It's going to require effort, and it's going to require a bit of dying to yourself, right? Or just death in general. And it was the exact thing that I needed to be yeah, okay, this isn't supposed to feel natural. This isn't supposed to feel like it's just coming to me and I can just do this. It's taking intentional effort, intentional thought, and then intentional action to do this, to pursue my husband and to love him in ways that aren't just obligatory sex, right?
We'll be back with the episode in just a minute. I have a question for you. Is sexual pleasure something that seems just out of grasp? Or maybe something you've never or rarely actually experienced? Sexual pleasure, and orgasm in particular, is something that a lot of Catholic women struggle with. Whether it's because of a misunderstanding of the point of sexual pleasure and God's design for it, or a lifetime of suppressing anything to do with sex because it was bad or dirty, maybe shame from past sexual experiences, or maybe just that no one ever stopped to walk you through an in-depth anatomical diagram and tell you about how female pleasure works. Whatever it is, orgasm is a confusing jumble of anatomy, mindset, partner dynamics, and a lot more. And it's not something that you want to Google because you never know what you're going to come across on the internet, and sifting through secular crap is just not something you have time for. That is why I created the Orgasm course for Catholic women. This course walks you through everything from anatomy to mindset to theology to the partner aspect of sex and orgasm, and it is all deeply rooted in Catholic truth. There is nowhere else that you can get all the good stuff and none of the bad stuff. Check out the Orgasm course for Catholic women at vinesinfullbloom.com/orgasm or click the link in the show notes. When you really look at what you just said of taking intentional action, really working to think about it, to pursue, how much more is there behind that then, right? If it was just something that just naturally occurred,
Right.
It's just kind of like, oh, great. But it's like, wow, you really put effort toward this. And that's beautiful.
Yeah.
And all of this that you're saying is reminding me of some things that we've talked about on the podcast. And I'm thinking that like, it's time to bring them back in an episode. But is that like a lot of times we will request something of our spouse and it might happen once, but then it's like doesn't keep happening.
Yeah.
And we can get really frustrated. It's like, I told him exactly what I wanted. Well, yeah, you did. But like, go back 2 minutes in this podcast episode and listen to the words Kathleen was saying, because that's it right there. The reason that it's so hard for our spouse to do even exactly what we've asked them to do, because it is hard work to love someone, and like it might take requesting that again and again. And it's not that your spouse doesn't love you. It's our fallen nature, right? It's like we aren't immediately inclined to just like always die to self, which that's right. It's hard to die to self.
It is really, really hard.
But that's also to say, and I'm sorry if I'm going to like kind of step on something you were going to say next, Kathleen, but
no, you're good.
Like when Kathleen and I have talked about this a lot, like she's talked about how Michael will bring this back up and say like, hey, like I'm not feeling pursued right now. Like what's going on? And like, that's him requesting that again. Right. And this has, and it, every time that request happens, it kind of brings back this like reminder of like, yes, I need to die to self. It is important that I pursue my husband, even though it's hard for me to do. And so, just that, I know that's not the topic we're talking about today, but it was just so perfect the way that you were saying it, that I just kind of want to like touch back on that. Like, it's not that your spouse doesn't love you if you have asked for something specifically. It's just that like, it's not natural.
It's not natural.
It's hard. It's hard work to create the habit, or, or just like think about things in a different way, or basically truly like just go back. Now it's probably like 5-ish minutes. Like just go back and listen to what Kathleen was saying.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. And I think that like, okay, to kind of switch to the practical, right? Like, okay, well, how do I do this? I think that first of all, the first thing to do, especially if you're having difficulty in your sexual relationship and just being on the same page, is to stop and ask your husband, do you feel loved by me? I think that's the very first question that needs to be asked. And it's not one that I asked, because it's not one that I thought needed to be asked. But it apparently did, right? Yeah. So it was told to me without me asking.
Well, that's good. But yes, everyone else, like ask your husband that question.
The question. And again, especially if you are struggling to get on the same page in your sexual relationship. I feel like now that it's like been revealed to me, like it just seems like, wow, this is probably a problem with a lot of people. Yeah. That we all think sex and disagreement on sex is the problem, and it's not. Like ultimately the problem is whether or not we're feeling loved. So ask that question first. Do you feel loved by me outside of our sexual relationship? And let him answer, and prompt him to be honest. Prompt him to give the hard, honest answer. And then the second thing that needs to be asked is, what can I do for you to feel really loved? My husband went so far as to create a Google Doc. A shared Google Doc of things that I could do that would make him feel loved. And it's really great, because I struggle just with like, amidst the chaos of raising 5 kids, homeschooling and just like, all the things, other school pickups. Like I've got kids all over the place. I've got some at school. I've got some at home. I've got little guys just needing to like survive. It's like, I've got kids everywhere. Amidst all of that chaos, it gets really hard to be creative. it just feels like you're constantly in survival mode. You're constantly just trying to like meet everybody's needs. And it's really hard to be creative and to stop and think like, oh, what can I do today that will help him feel loved? So by having this Google Doc, which sounds like really boring and lame and like almost businesslike, it's actually very helpful because it takes the pressure off of having to be creative and just be like, oh, I can just look at these and decide, what am I going to do today, right? For Michael to make sure that he's feeling loved. So encourage that, right? Just like a Google Doc. And I will say that, I don't know, like it can feel like a lot of pressure, like, oh, like we just need more dates and we need to go do this and we need to go do that. And like, that is not feasible for a lot of people, myself included. Like to get a sitter and go spend money doing whatever you're going to do and like take the time away. Like those things are awesome and they are necessary, but you can't do them every day. Right? Like you can't even necessarily do them every week. You know, I think you should have a weekly date time, but that doesn't always mean a date away. So, you know, trying to come up with those little ways, those daily ways of loving. And, you know, we've toted the love languages like a bajillion times in this podcast. But even so, like even knowing your spouse's love language, it can still be hard to think, if it's not your love language especially, right? It's still like, okay, well, what are things that I can do, you know, within his love language to help him feel loved? Like it can be hard to think of those things, to be creative with those things. So yeah, definitely ask them for like a actual, like a tangible list. Like give me a list of ways that you feel loved. You know, refute a claim that I think some people are going to have on this like list thing is that can feel really sterile or almost unloving if I'm just like checking things off of a list. And two things to that. One is, okay, then don't treat it like a checklist, right? Like, true, yeah. Treat it like an idea list and like prioritize it, right? A lot of it has to do with just our posture toward these things. And yeah, if you treat it like this checklist of like, okay, this is one more thing I need to do. I need to check off some sort of pursuit of my husband today. Yeah, well, that's going to feel really sterile and like not loving. Yeah. Because you're not treating it like a loving gift that you can give. But how much easier would it be, you know, if for your dad's birthday, you had a list of things he would love to be gifted for his birthday? Who else has problems shopping for their father? It's like the hardest person to shop for. Men in general are hard to shop for, I think. My brother was always hard. My dad was always hard. Michael's sometimes hard. Like, I think men in general, because the things they want are usually very expensive. Well, that's true. Like, sorry, I can't get you a table saw. They have what they need this time. Exactly. I can get you a table saw, and that covers the next 5 years of gifts. Yeah, basically. Oh my gosh. But we have to take ourselves out of this, like, oh, love has to be spontaneous, like mindset. Like, go listen to the episode called Spontaneity is Crap, and you will hear me on my whole diatribe about how dumb spontaneity is and how that's just something that like Hollywood has designed for us, and it's not real love. Like, God isn't spontaneous. He has everything planned out. Are you kidding me? Yeah. True. He didn't just like wake up one day and go, you know what? I want someone else to love. Like, this was all a plan. Yeah. But you know what I think is, you know, you're saying like treating it like a checklist. And yeah, like maybe try not to approach it like a checklist, right? But if you have to approach it like a checklist and you are struggling to approach it any other way, that's fine. Because essentially, again, I stink at creating habits. I stink. I am awful at building habits. Like, I was just telling Ellen, like I went for an ADHD evaluation and they said I had tendencies, but not like meeting threshold. And I'm just like, no, but like I have to have ADHD because I cannot stick with things like ever. And so it's really hard for me to create habits. With that being said, checklists are something that really help people with ADHD, right? Mm-hmm. And it's something that helps them to create the habits because they literally need that visual reminder. I have to do this, 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 and this, right? So if you have to treat it like a checklist in order to build the habit, then just do it, right? And like I'm telling, like I feel like everything I say on this podcast is like the pot calling the kettle black, right? It's like I'm not teaching you. I'm just talking to myself and any, maybe you're in my boat, right?
Anyway, me too.
Yeah, exactly. Like there's nothing wrong with it being a checklist because even though it might feel dry, the effort is still being put in, right? Like, and that is ultimately where the love is coming from, is from the effort, especially when it's hard, especially when it doesn't feel natural, right? It's the commitment to doing it and the effort you're putting in. Your feelings essentially don't matter. You don't have to feel loving if you're doing it, because love is not a feeling, it is an action, right?
Yep.
So like, just hit the checklist, man. I don't know. Like if you're struggling for it to feel like a sincere act, just remember that your feeling doesn't matter. Your act is what actually matters. So treat it like the checklist. Keep doing it, commit to it, and then ultimately you're going to build the habit of it where it's going to feel more sincere. It's going to feel like less of a chore because you've built it into your daily living.
I love everything you just said because I don't know if you, like I said at the beginning, I was like, there's two things I want to refute. And that was the second thing that I was going to say. So that was awesome. That was perfect.
Perfect. We're just mind melding.
And I wanted to give an example actually from Gary Chapman's 5 Love Languages book. And it's right at the beginning of his book. And he's kind of talking about his work as a counselor, like prior to kind of like figuring out these 5 love languages. And he had this couple and he was like, here's what you guys are going to do every day for the next 30 days. You are going to actively compliment each other. You have to compliment each other on something, which, if you know love languages, right? That's words of affirmation. That is the love language. But at the time, it's like, he didn't know that. He just like gave this task to the couple. And they came back to the next session. And the man was like, this has been the best month ever. I feel so loved. It was amazing. And the woman is like, honestly, it just felt so sterile. I was just like, I just felt I gave him the compliment because I needed to do it each day, but it just didn't really feel. And it's like, I knew his compliments were just because he was like checking them off the list. And that's when Gary Chapman realized, oh, there are different ways that people feel love. Because even though the woman wasn't feeling the love in giving and receiving compliments, the man whose love language was obviously words of affirmation, he felt it and loved it and was just living it up for that. He was like, this is awesome. I feel so loved because my wife is affirming me. She's complimenting me, all this kind of stuff. But the wife whose love language wasn't words of affirmation, like felt that sterility and felt that like checkboxness. So that is something else to kind of keep in mind that like, again, we love the 5 love languages here. Like that's,
we do.
We love them. And that sterility feeling can happen when we're doing things that aren't our own love language. But again, it's that action of doing it, not the feeling behind it, that is the love. And if that, if you have done what we asked you to do, which is ask your husband for a list, the things that are going to be on his list are going to be his love language. And so they really, truly are going to speak to him on a more emotional level, even if they don't speak to you in any way on an emotional level. And so I think like we just got to kind of like push that silly thoughts out of our head and just like remember that the action is the love, not the feeling of it. And like that, honestly, that sterile feeling, truly, we're just going to go back theologically to wrap up this episode. That is the devil trying to get you to stop pursuing and loving your spouse.
Yeah.
Because he's like, it's not actually, you don't actually love him by doing these actions. These are just dumb. You're just checking a box. You're not that good of a wife, right? Like all of those thoughts that go in your head, that is not from the Lord. And you need to just throw those out.
Yeah.
Oh, quickly. And then one last suggestion that I had is, you know, if you're like feel uncomfortable asking for a list, is one of two things. One is go figure out your spouse's love language and then go look in the book or on Gary Chapman's website, which I think is like the5lovelanguages.com or something like that. Like just Google search it and you will definitely find it.
Yeah,
and like there are lists of examples for the different love languages. And so just try some of those. If you feel uncomfortable about asking for a list, like if you're like, ooh, that's just like not our dynamic right now. Yeah. And then the other option is, and I think this is kind of in between the two, again, if you're like, ooh, I don't know if I could like ask him to write down a list, is just like sit down and talk about ways that he might feel loved. And then afterward, go jot those down real quick.
Yeah.
And make yourself a list. If it's just like, I don't know if I could ask that of my husband.
Yeah. Yeah. No, those are great tips. I love it.
Anything else to add?
I want to just point out and reiterate what you said about the devil, like not wanting you to pursue and love your husband. That is the realest thing that has been said in this entire episode. So, you know, I think for me, it became so clear as we were trying to figure out sexual issues that there was a piece that I was missing. And it was like, it had to be so obvious to me. And I just couldn't figure it out. Like, what is missing? And I went to prayer and I, in the name of Jesus, just banished the devil from blinding me. Like I knew that he was blinding me to something really obvious. And I just told Jesus to completely remove him, to open my eyes and to let me see. And it happened like literally almost instantly, where it was just like, he's not being pursued and he doesn't feel loved. Like, and that was it. And again, it's been really hard and I have not been perfect. I've continued to fail in pursuing and loving him. But I think that every time that happens, what I'm finding is that I just need to go back to prayer and I need to rebanish the devil. Like he just keeps trying to seep in and he keeps like slipping that hand like over one eye. And then I have to like, you know, banish him to remove it. Right. It's like, he is trying so hard to keep us in the place where we've struggled for 11 years.
Yes.
And it takes that really serious, intentional prayer to continue banishing him. It's not like you can do it once and then he's gone forever. He keeps coming back.
Yeah.
So keep praying against him and keep recommitting yourself to the effort of making your husband feel loved.
It's worth it.
It's worth it.
Thanks so much for listening. If you are not already following us on Instagram, be sure to check us out at Charting Toward Intimacy. And if you listen to podcasts on a platform that gives you the option to rate or review, we'd love for you to do that because it helps us spread the word about the podcast. If you ever have questions, comments, or episode topic ideas, please reach out to us. We love to hear from you. You can reach out on Instagram or send us an email. Our email is in the show notes. Until next time.